welcome to today's webinar. We will be focusing today on how to show that quality of education is having an impact on your students. My name is Phil. I'm one of our partnership managers over here at Ark Curriculum Plus. I'm here today with my colleague Alice, and I will let Alice introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Alice, and I'm a Principal Development Lead at English Mastery. So welcome, everyone. It's lovely to have you here.
Great. Thanks, Alice. Before we get stuck into the content about quality of education, about English Mastery, I'll just give you a bit of a background about who we are for any of you who don't know. So who Ark Curriculum Plus are, who English Mastery are. But before that, a little bit of housekeeping. As I've said, just make sure that you've got your first name and not your full name in your name. For anyone who's come in after I said that, just put your first name and remove your surname from your Zoom display name. Please just make sure that your microphone and your camera are off throughout, just to make sure that we all run smoothly. If you've got any general questions, we will be having a Q&A at the end of today's session where they will all be asked. However, if you have a question that pops into your head as we're going through, please just pop it in the chat. I'll collate them as we go, and then we'll be able to answer all of them at the end of the session. There'll be a bit of interactivity in today's session, so be ready to share your expertise and your experience. And as I've said already, but for anyone who's come in after that, today's session will be recorded and then it will be uploaded to our website after today. So a bit about us over here at Ark Curriculum Plus. We are Ark Curriculum Plus, and we were born out of the Ark schools. We are now our own separate entity, but we still have a really sort of close link with Ark schools, which is brilliant because we can work with them really closely to develop amazing complete curriculum programs. Despite this link, we have grown considerably, and we now work in over 600 schools across the country. We have a wide range of programs. So at secondary, we have our English Mastery, we have our Maths Mastery, and we've got our Science Mastery just launching at the moment. And we've got our really great Maths Mastery program at primary, as well as our Science, History and Geography, which are in the process at the moment. We have a very clear mission, and this mission is to empower teachers to give every young person, regardless of their background, the subject knowledge and skills that will allow those pupils to succeed. So everything we do is working towards that clear mission. I'm about to hand over to Alice to get stuck in to the meat about this English Mastery. But in the chat, whilst we're just swapping over our screen sharing, could you just introduce yourself, your school, and then could you give a quick summary of how the first full week back has been in 3 words?
Hi, everybody. My name's Alice, for those people that have just joined us. Lovely to see lots of people introducing themselves on the chat. Hi, Laura, Becky, busy. Hi, Kate. Hi, Claire. Hi, Luciana. Hi, Kerry. Debbie, Matthew. Nairobi, Kenya. Wow, amazing. Oh, brilliant, thought-provoking from Fleur. Thank you, everybody. So continue to share. Sounds like everyone's had a full throttle beginning to the big term. As Lucy has just said, as always, really tiring, or not tiring, really busy start to the term. So thank you for giving up your evening or afternoon then to join us here. And as Phil said, what we're going to be talking about today is looking at the Ofsted framework. So we're going to look at how a quality of education is having an impact on your students. And as I mentioned, my name's Alice and I'm a Principal Development Lead at English Mastery. So essentially I support schools with their implementation of the programme. I was previously an English teacher and a leader, and I've worked for English Mastery for the last 3.5 years now. So the aims of today's session, we're going to look at the impact, the intent, implementation and impact of your own curriculum, and then also reflect on those 3 elements in the English Mastery curriculum. And hopefully there's going to be an opportunity to answer any questions you may have. Pop them in the chat as we go and I will try to cover them, and also we'll have some time at the end. I may be going at a bit of a breakneck speed because I feel like there's so much to get through. So please just do pop questions in the chat and I will try and answer them as I go. So what is quality of education? I'm sure you've had these conversations endlessly in school and really focusing on that new framework. But just so we've got that shared common language, what we mean by quality of education, it draws together the curriculum, the teaching and the assessment to really place curriculum at the heart of the inspection and at the heart of what schools do. And we were really pleased at English Mastery because that's what's been the kind of bread and butter of what we've been doing since the very beginning, since we began in 2014. Curriculum is at the heart of everything we do, and we really want students to have that real love of reading and writing, and that comes through a brilliant curriculum. So why is it so important? Why is it at the heart of our curriculum? So we believe that this renewed focus on curriculum in the last few years gives a much clearer sense of what it means to be a student of English. And it shows us a much clearer model of how students can progress through our subject, grow and mature throughout Key Stage 3. And so it organises and cherishes the most important concepts, ideas and texts within the beautiful subject of English. And then it puts what we love about our subject back at the heart of education. I know that when the new GCSE spec was introduced, and everyone was quite rightly a little bit overwhelmed maybe with the new spec, and sometimes it led to a really exam-focused approach to the curriculum. So we're really putting a love of reading and writing and a love of the subject back at the heart of education. Can I just ask anyone that's joined just to mute themselves as well? I can hear a little bit of noise there. So the intent of the curriculum, again, I'm sure this is really familiar to you and something that you've been discussing in your schools, but essentially it's what leaders intend pupils to learn. So what is the intent and what sits behind the curriculum? What's the core knowledge? And so Ofsted has said that it should be a curriculum that's ambitious for all pupils, it's coherently planned and sequenced, it's carefully thinking about the needs of students with SEN and or disabilities, for example, and it's a curriculum that's broad and balanced for all pupils. So really is the bread and butter of the conversations I'm sure you've been having in your schools. What leaders intend pupils to learn? What's going to happen lesson by lesson, week by week, year by year? So in terms of intent, there's been a real journey, and I'm sure lots of you are familiar with this one, about where we originally started. And this scheme of work was really familiar to me when I first kind of joined teaching and was shown a 3-year map for Key Stage 3. And so previously, kind of before 2014, often pass rates were good. So students were getting a C in the old GCSE grades, but progress was not. So students weren't making as much progress as we would hope. And lots of Key Stage 4 was spent making up for those lost years and that lost ground in Key Stage 3. And so this definitely happened at the schools that I worked at. If you were experienced and a strong practitioner, you were deployed on GCSE classes. And sometimes year 7, 8 and 9 was maybe for some non-subject specialists. It might have been for less experienced teachers. And sometimes in some schools that led to a void of clarity around progression, content and consistency. And often it led to something like this unit of work here you can see, where there wasn't that consistency and growth across the 3 years. It could seem a little bit hodgepodged in lots of ways. So it would be great to hear from you now. And as Phil mentioned at the start of the chat, we really would love you to be generous with your expertise and experience here. So it'd be great to hear, what journey have you been on? Is this unit of work familiar to you? Maybe a couple of years ago, 5, 6 years ago, what journey have you been on? And how is your curriculum now sequenced? So I'll give you a few minutes in the chat to share what journey you've been on and how your curriculum is now sequenced. It would be great to hear from colleagues that we have with us today. Thanks, Becky. Second week in the job. I hope it's going well. I've been appointed with a brief to update the curriculum. Okay, brilliant. Well, hopefully this is a great session for you. Yes, definitely, Martin. So a big restructuring, more diverse, really thinking about the text that you're sharing. Thanks, Martin. I'd be interested, helix structure, that's not a phrase that I've heard before, so I'd be really interested to hear more there. Okay, coming through really quickly now. I'm going to try and read them. Yeah, I think sometimes, as Laura said, there's those units that you feel really confident with, and often maybe you enjoy teaching, but sometimes there wasn't that thought. It was quite a standalone unit. There wasn't that cumulative nature and cohesive approach. So Laura, it's great to hear you've got more of that cohesion now. Yeah, so more complex and quality text. I mean, I taught Stone Cold and I think it's a great text, but I don't know if I would think, okay, well, let's really dedicate our precious time to studying this one in depth with our students. Maybe it might be a better reading for pleasure text. Just going to read a few more comments here. Thank you for being so generous here. It's great insights. Yep, stage not age approach. Yeah, interesting. Emma said less is more, thematically linked. Love that, thank you. Okay, I'm just gonna, God, there's so many good comments there. Yeah, been on a journey. Yeah, a broad range, Shakespeare every year. That's something that we think is really important too. So interesting, a tough, arduous journey. We started again from scratch. And that's the thing, this takes real time, and teachers are incredibly busy people, and to be teaching full time, you know, have all of those extra responsibilities that sometimes come along with teaching, and design a curriculum from scratch is incredibly time consuming, and thinking about that sequencing can take a really long time as well. Okay, I'm going to move on now in the interest of time, but I'm going to come back to these. So thank you so much, because this is a really useful starting point. Thank you everyone for sharing. So we've spoken about some of the journeys that you've been on, and we've been through a similar adaptation and support of the curriculum, and we're really lucky that we're in over 160 schools. So we are a programme for teachers and by teachers, but that means that we can constantly consult and see what's working in schools in a range of contexts. So we've thought really carefully about our intent, and the English Mastery Curriculum has been designed to develop a deep appreciation and love of reading and writing. That's at the core of what we do. And we've chosen really challenging and seminal texts from the literary canon. You'll notice that when we look at the curriculum map. And knowledge is really carefully sequenced and selected due to its power and utility. So the Literary Heritage Curriculum explicitly teaches and tests knowledge that will support students' understanding of future texts in the Literary Heritage Curriculum and their ability to inspire awe, wonder and engagement. So as an example, In Oliver Twist in Year 7, students learn about why poor families were sent to workhouses and what the conditions were like there. So this is what knowledge that we think is worth learning and remembering, because it helps students to understand what overcoming adversity and the struggles of the working class are. And then with every subsequent text studied in Key Stage 3, students augment and refine their understanding of this powerful knowledge. So they explore those literary themes of adversity and oppression and corruption in the pigs, for example, in Animal Farm, in Mr. Brocklehurst's hypocritical treatment of the girls in Jane Eyre. And we've really carefully thought about how this knowledge offers a powerful foundation for study at Key Stage 4 and beyond, where students, for example, encounter the cruelty of Ebenezer Scrooge and the cold indifference of Arthur Burling and Inspector Calls. So we've really carefully thought about that knowledge and how it builds cumulatively across the 3 years. And all of that is connected to build a really strong foundation for our students as they move to Key Stage 4 and beyond. As well as that, we have some really core design principles that sit behind our programme as well. And the first and foremost is knowledge rich. We have that knowledge rich approach. We believe that kind of knowledge is the pathway to skill in lots of ways, and skill are very much embedded in our curriculum, but it's with a knowledge rich approach. Academically ambitious, so we choose texts and activities that are academically challenging for our students. We've got a logically sequenced curriculum that's carefully sequenced, including teaching and reteaching foundational concepts of the discipline, and then activities that have been designed to support students to remember the most important ideas. And the impact of that is that our students enjoy and succeed in English at Key Stage 3 and beyond. And as I mentioned earlier, in terms of a workload, there are, we've got curriculum designers. Everyone on the team used to be an English teacher. And so it's someone's full-time job to put this work together and really carefully think about the sequence of the curriculum. And it's something that's quite literally had years and years of work behind it. So we're really confident that it does lead to that impact there. So I'll just give you a moment to scan over our curriculum now, quite a stripped down version of it. I'll just give you a moment to look at it. So you can see here how these ideas that we've previously mentioned, a deep appreciation of reading and writing, and carefully selected and academically ambitious, logically sequenced, is embodied in our curriculum map. So we've got themes of Victorian literature in the autumn term, Shakespeare in the modern play in the spring term, and then summer one, we've got our modern literature and voices and choices in summer 2. All of that has the writing mastery threading through with the reading for pleasure, but we've really carefully thought about academically challenging, ambitious texts for our students that's really going to have that close cumulative nature that's building sequentially and increasing incrementally in challenge across the 3 years. So by the end of Year 9, when they're completing those final units, they're incredibly ready for Key Stage 4 to bounce into Year 10 and have all of that great disciplinary knowledge, both in terms of context, but also in terms of the subject of English. So to go even closer into an example of that, here is an example of how the Victorian literature element of the literary heritage strand of the curriculum. So you can see here how the knowledge is selected in each unit across the 3 years, and it builds towards that essential knowledge for Key Stage 4. So Year 7, they learn about the city and characterization, then they learn about scientific developments in Sherlock Holmes, and that's built on even in greater depth Victorian morality. And then you can see that all of those links to Year 10 and Year 11. So how that builds to those texts that they're doing. We've really carefully thought about that constantly, how they're building towards the Key Stage 4 text and giving them really powerful knowledge to be successful when they come to study Jekyll and Hyde, for example, or A Christmas Carol. And to just emphasize the point even further, we'll look at how this cumulative nature and this sequencing articulates itself or manifests itself in student writing. So I'm about to show you an example now of a high-performing student who completed a Year 9 Jane Eyre essay. But I think it's really useful, the paragraph we're going to look at encapsulating the sequencing of the curriculum. So it's an example from a Jane Eyre essay, as I mentioned. And here I think you'll see how the skills and the knowledge build across the year groups. So in year 7, students learn about selecting evidence, but they also learn about the mistreatment of orphans in Oliver Twist. They also learn about how writers use their novels to convey a moral message. They also learn about poor sanitation and disease in the Victorian era that you can see there. So just give you a moment just to look at those before I move on. I'm aware I don't want to go too quickly. So a few of the pieces of knowledge that are taught in year 7 are highlighted there. Then let's look at year 8. So in year 8, they're explicitly taught about linking analytical paragraphs. And they're also taught about selecting and using the appropriate quotations. In Sherlock Holmes, they learn about status in Victorian society. They also learn in their grammar lessons about multiple subordinate clauses that you can see here. Explicitly, we teach them about composing a balanced argument, which you can see there with that phrase that this student has used, one could infer that. Discussing a topic from multiple perspectives is also discussed in year 8. So you can see how this knowledge is building incrementally and shining really brightly in year 9. It's not just something that we've just taught in one term, it's something that's really building slowly across the 3 years. So then let's come to the final year 9 examples of the knowledge that's been taught. So we teach them the apostrophe of possession in the writing section. They also learn about the temptation and fall of Adam and Eve. They also learn in Jane Eyre about Victorian attitudes towards childhood. And a child is born innocent versus a child is born evil, and a child is a blank slate. And then finally, they learn that Brocklehurst is a Christian, but he's a moral hypocrite. So these different pieces of knowledge are all building cumulatively and have been sequenced really carefully across the 3 years to build in towards the analysis that this student is showing. So obviously that's a high prior attainer. We've got some examples for that for low prior attainers, but I think it's just a really useful example in showing how all of that knowledge and the intent manifests itself in student work. So just before we have a look at the implementation aspect, I just wanted to share a few examples of some excerpts from Ofsted inspections from this year. So quite a few of our schools have been through the programme, have been through an Ofsted inspection in recent months. I think it's really important to emphasise here that the most successful schools are the ones that take real ownership of that curriculum. Although English Mastery is a fully resourced curriculum, it's not a fully planned curriculum. And the most successful schools with Ofsted obviously are the ones that are taking real ownership. So I'll just give you a moment to read some of the feedback there about the programme. Okay, and yeah, feel free to pop any questions. I'll check those in a second. So now let's look at the implementation. So essentially, this is the delivery of the curriculum. So again, it'd be great to hear some feedback from our colleagues here. So in your school, how do you ensure the intent of your curriculum is implemented in the classroom? How do you support your team? So I'll give you a minute to reflect, but how do you ensure the intent, so the ideas behind your curriculum, are implemented effectively and with success in the classroom? Thank you. So we've got collaborative planning, regular quality assurance, student voice, definitely, shared resources. And I think what I also really important to mention is that your intent, you know, not just you as the leader, your senior leaders, your teachers, even your students should be able to articulate the intent of your curriculum. It's really important that from your ECTs all the way to your SLT are really able to confidently articulate the intent of the curriculum. Great, lots about collaborative planning here. Yeah, progress checks, observations, drop-ins. Yeah, sounds like some really brilliant practice, reusing resources centrally and then adapting to the needs of your students. So very similar to what we would do at English Mastery as well. So we really focus on developing subject knowledge and expertise within the teams. And so we do that through a whole different range of elements, but I'll just share some of those with you now. So we have the teaching overviews, which we've essentially put together short clips on the content of 2 weekly sections of the lessons. What's the core knowledge? What are the misconceptions? They're designed by teachers delivering the programme in different schools, and they're to help really develop that subject knowledge, you know, for potentially ECTs or someone new to the curriculum. We've got, as lots of people mentioned, co-planning is at the heart of successful English Mastery schools. It's happening weekly. Teachers are getting together, taking ownership of the resources, thinking about how they can match it to the bespoke needs of their individual classes. We've got twice termly masterclasses, training happening, which covers a whole range of different topics from the grammar to planning and adapting the resources, and they're available as live webinars. On English Mastery, there's a mastery lead, so someone in the department, sometimes a 2IC, sometimes a head of department, and a kind of aspiring middle leader, and they attend 6 training sessions throughout the year on leadership and pedagogy. And then, of course, we've got the lesson PowerPoints, detailed notes, that include the pedagogical content knowledge and suggest examples and common misconceptions to navigate. So all of those elements combine together to help really develop subject knowledge and expertise for teachers. But to take a tangible example, for example, are the Tempest unit. These are just some of the elements that combine to really develop subject knowledge and expertise for our teachers. So we have co-planning sessions, bespoke resources that we put together weekly. We've got teacher reading lists that we suggest teachers read through and kind of talk about with their colleagues. We've got, as I mentioned, the teacher overviews. Shukri works in one of our schools and she's put together a teaching overview for every 2 weeks of lessons at the Tempest. We've also got standardization booklets, which I'll come to more in a moment, but they include real life student examples of essays from the units. So all of that combines to really place a focus on emphasising subject knowledge and expertise for our teachers and really placing that at the heart of the work that we do, because although it's a resource curriculum, it's also a professional development tool at its core as well. So again, with implementation, I'll just let you scan over some examples from 2 different schools who have completed an inspection with the programme. And so here you can really see how teachers are matching it to the needs of their students, thinking carefully about their subject knowledge and how to present subject matter. And that's happening through a whole range of different formats, but as I mentioned, co-planning, and also the subject knowledge development classes and live and non-live training that are available through the programme. So lastly, let's look at impact. How do you measure the impact of your curriculum? So you've got the intent, you've really thought about it in the classroom, but how do you know whether it's working? How do you know that its students are making progress? So now it would be great to hear your reflections again. How do you know that students are making progress in your lessons, in your team's lessons? And what do you think teachers in your team would say? So we had a bit of inside knowledge recently from an ofsted inspector. And they said that it's really important that every teacher is able to articulate this from you as the mastery lead, or you as the 2IC, or your head of department, to your early careers teacher who's just joined the profession. How are they able to know that students are making progress? So again, I'll leave you some time to share in the chat. Thanks, James. Very in bold there, assessment, exactly. PLCs, can you share, what do you mean by PLCs? It'd be great to hear what type of assessments you do as well. So Laura said progress checks, midpoint assessments. Yep, standardization of materials is really important to ensure that consistency of marking. Personal learning checklist. Thanks for clarifying, James. Yep, so student voice. Definitely, we know that in inspections, they kind of track the progress, don't they, of 5 or 6 students across the subjects, and they think about, okay, what can you remember, what do you know? So student voice is a really great one. Teacher discussion, I think that's a really important one, Jenny. End of day check-in, formally and informally. Yeah, thank you, Emma. So regularly checking through exercise books in the classroom when you're walking around. Do nows to recap knowledge. Definitely. So Grant, I think you've raised a really important point there. Students need to be able to tell you what they know and what they can remember from their lessons. And, you know, if they're learning, for example, about corruption in Animal Farm, where else have you learned about corruption? What did you learn in year 7 about corruption? So they can't just tell you about that lesson, but they're able to apply and connect that to previous lessons. Just using an English mastery example as at the tip of my tongue there. Okay, I'm going to move on now, but thank you so much I'm just reading a few words that I'm going to move on. But Lucy, yeah, so data drops moderation, questioning, making links, making those connections, isn't it? Thank you for sharing there. So lots of what we have already in our curriculum. So we measure impact through a variety of ways, but we've already mentioned some of them. So obviously every lesson has a do now retrieval activity, activates prior learning and promotes recall for the new learning in the lesson. Throughout each lesson, we've got checks for understanding, which allow formative assessment and allow students to actively check in with their own understanding as the lesson progresses. Each lesson, of course, has an application task where students are expected to discuss and write an extended response and demonstrate how well they're grasping that new knowledge. We also have exit tickets. They're provided for the end of every lesson to check that students have understood and remembered the core knowledge from the lesson. And these questions, alongside the teacher guidance, support teachers to identify misconceptions that may be present and allow them to adjust future teaching based on their students' progress. So a really useful check for the teacher to know how well the lesson has gone, essentially. We also have fortnightly mastery quizzes. So they're, as it says on the tin, every 2 weeks, the core knowledge from those units, and we have reteach activities. And they've been really carefully designed, that low stakes assessment, to disrupt the forgetting curve by drawing on previously taught knowledge in students' working memory. So we're always carefully thinking about cognitive load and students' long-term memory and short-term memory. We've also got, as I said, as people mentioned already, we've got that co-planning guidance. So that invites mastery leads to get teachers to consider specific groups of pupils in their planning. So they've got really clear expectations of student responses, as well as a concrete action plan for how they're going to use questioning and modelling and other scaffolding strategies. So a whole range of examples that we have in kind of checking the impact of the curriculum. But one of those brilliant ones that I'm going to hone in on now is our Assessing for Mastery workshops. So they really are, I think, one of the best bits of the programme. So they're termly sessions where teachers from across the English Mastery community, as I mentioned, there's 160 schools. So although not an entirely national picture, gives you a really good understanding of how your students are performing in more of a national picture than even in just your MAT or if you're a standalone school. So they're a great opportunity to agree age-related grades. We provide age-related grades. So that means a year 7 student, we give them an age-related 9876. So that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be a year 11 stage 9, because they're 5 years behind a year 11. So with age-related grades, we find they're more accurate in representing where a student is at that point, rather than, oh, brilliant, you're doing really well, you're on a 1, that some schools use in terms of the non-age related grades. And they give mastery leads a really brilliant opportunity to identify areas of strength and also areas for development, comparing them with scripts from across the country. And so as an example here, this is just a really short excerpt of the introductions from the Jane Eyre standardization booklet. So you can see the age-related 9, 5 and 1. So I'll just give you a moment to just scan over those. And so we use the standardization booklet because we find it's a lot more reliable than mark schemes. So here we've got a concrete example of what a 5 looks like, for example. We can compare that and think, okay, is it better or worse using the comparative judgment process? And we find that although no form of assessment is ever 100% accurate, this provides a much better indication of how students are doing and how effectively they are reading and writing, rather than mark schemes, which can become a tick box exercise. The rubrics can be warped. You know, my perceptive or my judicious may be totally different from my colleagues, but using concrete examples of students' work that we've collated over years and years of the programme is a much better indication of how students are performing at that level. So in year 9, in autumn term of year 9, how are they comparing to their peers from across the network? So finally, just a quick another extract from an Ofsted inspection there. I'll give you a moment to look at that.
God, they really have, haven't they?
I think someone's not muted. Okay, so that was probably really, really quick and speaking at such a quick pace. But please do pop any questions in the chat. I'm going to pass over to Phil now, who hopefully will just take you through in a little bit more detail about the programme. So I'll stop sharing. Phil, if anyone has any questions in the meantime, please do share them. And I'm just going to pass back on to Phil now.
Thanks, Alice. So I'm going to take you through a little bit more about what our programme looks like. What do you get if you are thinking, oh, we would love to partner with English Mastery? We are a complete curriculum programme. What that means is you get everything that you need to teach our curriculum, but also to empower and to develop your teachers to become real expert practitioners at teaching our curriculum. So you get a fully resourced mastery curriculum for Key Stage 3. So as Alice has spoken about throughout today's session, all of that includes our thoughts on our intent, our implementation, and how we can evidence that impact. That has our full suite of assessment resources included, so you really do get everything that you need to teach this really, really effectively. We've got intervention resources included in there, and we also have 2 curriculum pathways, so we can support a range of learners. We've got our traditional pathway, but we've also got our foundation pathway, where pupils may be slightly below their age-related expectations, and we want to catch them up quickly back onto that traditional pathway. So an example of something you may find in there is slightly abridged versions of the text you are studying to make sure that everything is accessible for those pupils and we get them caught up as quickly as possible. We've got on-demand introductory training. So for schools who maybe missed that training at the beginning, this is also live at the beginning of every year so that schools can really get stuck in and they're set up really well to teach our program. We've also got a huge amount of professional development. As I mentioned before, we want to empower every teacher within the classroom to be as expert as possible within our program. So we have a huge amount of professional development resources. Let's zoom into those resources a bit more then. So you get your lesson slides, which are in a PowerPoint format. These are fully editable. The teacher's time will be freed up to be able to think about those pupils in front of them, to be able to make adaptations, differentiate these slides, scaffold them to really meet the needs of their pupils. As Alice has spoken about, you get these unit guides, you get homework activities, you get knowledge organisers, you've got all of these assessment tasks, and you've got your co-planning resources. So as I've spoken about, it's fully resourced, but also editable to meet the needs of your pupils. Professional development is a huge, huge part of what we do. As I've spoken about, we want to develop both teachers, but also leaders within your school. Our aim is to develop your capacity to get you to a point where you are using all of our brilliant resources, but we can sort of take away our support bit by bit, and you are really taking ownership and driving your curriculum. So on the screen are some examples of what we can provide: induction training, leadership training, development sessions with, these can be in person and virtual, where you can speak about any barriers to implementation or any developments you are looking to bring in to your curriculum. We also have these brilliant Assessing for Mastery days, which Alice has already spoken about. So we know that a new curriculum is a big commitment. It's something that you won't take lightly as a school, and it's something that you want to make sure you invest your time and effort to get it as brilliant as possible. So we've got three really key things we want to do when we partner with you to get this curriculum up and running. We want to empower your teachers. We want to prioritise the highest impact changes within classrooms, but we also want to make this as easy as possible for you to implement. The last thing we want to do is for you to have to spend all of your time just thinking about implementation and not get to focus on your teaching as a department. So to do this, we think of it as a journey. The beginning of that journey is a launch. So this is when you get your new curriculum into your school. All of your teachers get that induction training. They really start to understand what they are doing in that school, and they understand your intent, and they get trained on how to deliver these lessons. Once it's launched and everyone understands what you're doing, everyone's on the same page, we then move into a development stage. This is when we're developing teachers' practice. We're getting those really great PD sessions in. We're thinking about how can we best adapt these resources, how can we best differentiate them, how can we best meet the need of every pupil in our class. Once we've gone through this development stage, we then get onto this sustain stage. We've got our practice really good. We've got English mastery really well embedded into our classrooms. And then we're continuing to make these small incremental improvements to pupils' outcomes as the needs of your school evolve. So if this is something that sounds interesting to you, if it's something that you'd like to know a bit more about, there's a couple of things you can do. You can register for a free trial. There's a QR code on the bottom left of your screen at the moment. If you scan this, it will take you to a page to register for a free trial. Or if you can't quite work out how to use the QR code, there's just a shortened hyperlink below it. If you type that into your browser, that will also take you to the free trial page. Alternatively, you can contact us via email by emailing partnerships@arkcurriculumplus.org.uk. We'll now move on to our question and answer session. So what we'll do is we will pull up the chat for any questions that we have had throughout. Alice, the first one I saw that came in that I'll put to you was that, do students read the whole novels when they study this? Is that something they do, or is it extracts from the novels?
Yes, so we are really passionate about students studying the full text. I think one of the main reasons of that is when you just study as text in a half term, you know, out of a 6-7 week term, that means, you know, you've got the first week doing kind of introductions, your last week of the half term might be assessment, and that sometimes leaves you only about 5 weeks to get through, you know, an incredibly nuanced and challenging text like Oliver Twist. So we're really passionate about having the whole text for each term. And we do a multitude of things, but for example, with Oliver Twist, they have an abridged version, and we also read extracts from the original. And you can
just check that radiator when I leave.
Yeah.
Simon, thank you. Oh, I've lost my train of thought. Yeah, so we have the extracts and the abridged version for year 7, but then that incrementally increases in challenge. So, for example, in year 9, students do Jane Eyre, and the traditional pathway read the text and they don't read any of the abridged version, but we do the first 10 chapters because we know it's an incredibly long text and it's even difficult to get through an autumn term. So yes, students read the whole text. We think it's important that they have that exposure. We don't do extracts solely. We really value that whole text of starting a text from the beginning to the end. Samantha, really good question. It's really important that students are able to articulate what they're learning and how it connects. So not that they're all going to parrot off the curriculum intent that you might have agreed with your team, but speaking to students about how the knowledge connects. So just as an English mastery example, you know, how what they're learning in Oliver Twist links towards Sherlock Holmes and links with Jane Eyre. Obviously, they're going to be able to articulate that in a much more nuanced way when they've studied Jane Eyre, but being able to talk about what they're learning and how that connects across the 3 years. I hope that answers your question, Samantha. Martin said, do students ever read classroom text in advance? They can do. We tend to focus the reading in the lessons just because, you know, we're not we understand that homework is often really different school by school. Some schools, they take the books home, some schools they don't. Some schools, all the kids would lose the books and things like that. So we generally would suggest mainly doing the reading in the lesson. However, if you've got a class that you know would go away and they're super keen and they would read it all, then yeah, I think that's, you know, it's always the expert of the teacher.